I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today on the show, we are talking hunting whitetails on the ground. Natural blinds, ground blinds, spot and stalk, and using a decoy at eye level while moving in with a bow. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. And we've got a extra special episode today because it's kind of a two-parter. Part 2, the main episode, which I teased just a second ago, is all about hunting whitetails on the ground. It's with Travis Glassman. He is a diehard bow hunter from Kansas who has perfected a number of different techniques for chasing bucks at eye level. He's done it in ground blinds. He's done it in natural blinds. He's done it spot and stalk. And he, most interestingly, does it with a handheld decoy that he uses in front of him to get these bucks to come right in, try to beat them up, and then he gets them with an arrow before they can get him with their antlers. And it's really, really interesting stuff. So that's the main show. If you want to learn anything about different ways to get out of the tree and on the ground, this one's for you. But before we get to that, I have a special guest here for our introduction, the one and only nine-fingered wonder, my brother from another mother. Dan Johnson's back on the show, ladies and gentlemen. Dan, I'm really glad we're able to make schedules work here kind of last minute because we haven't got to catch up in a couple months now. So thanks for figuring out a way to make this work.
Hey, I appreciate it, Mark. But you forgot to mention one thing about Travis. Not only is he a great whitetail hunter, number one, he is a really good guy. Yeah. And number two, his wife is a slayer as well.
True. She's put some really good deer on the ground.
Really good deer on the ground.
The two of them are a deadly duo. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. So absolutely. Yeah, it's gonna be a good podcast. And with you though, with you, it's going to be a good podcast too. I didn't mean that.
We'll see if I can't get censored today.
Yeah. But what I want to do with you, man, is cover off on something that we have done every single year since the beginning of the podcast, which is do an episode where we cover off on our game plan for the year. You know, what our goals are, what the hunts are that we're going on, what our hopes are. If there's any deer that we're chasing this year, and just because of how crazy this year's been, we haven't been able to do a full show. But I thought we could do like an intro conversation about that stuff. So kind of abbreviate it, and we're partway into the season already, so I know it's late, but better late than never. I figured. Are you game for that?
I'm game for that, but I want to sabotage this podcast for one, like real quick, just for a second. Okay. Have you ever been? You're from Michigan. Have you ever been to Grand Haven, Michigan?
Hell yeah, man.
Okay.
Love it.
So shout out to one of my favorite bars that I've been to in the country, the Tip a Few Tavern in Grand Haven. Have you ever been there?
I've not been there.
Oh man, they make one of the most beautiful Jack and Cokes that I have ever drank. And it's really not a Jack and Coke. It's like a Coke and Jack, if that makes sense. They're pretty strong, but I don't know. I just figured I'd give a shout out to the state of Michigan with, I'm looking at their koozie right here. That's why I brought this up.
Nice. Yeah. Grand Haven was a place that I went a ton growing up because we didn't live too far from that when I was a kid. So that was like the summer spot to go to, but I haven't really been back since college probably. So It's been a while. So next time I do though, I'll check it out.
Yeah. Just send me a selfie with, at the tavern there.
All right. Coke and Jack. I'll order it.
Coke and Jack. Yep, absolutely.
Oh man, it's not a Mark and Dan podcast if there isn't a good alcohol reference somewhere in there. So this is appropriate.
Or just like a hard right turn to something that has nothing to do with deer hunting.
Yeah. So how you feeling about 2021? You've already had a hunt under your belt. So have I. I've had a handful. Give me like on a 1 to 10 scale, like your sense of how it's going so far and how you feel about what's coming up.
All right. So I'm going to just say this. All right. We've talked about this September shift for a while now.
Yes.
Right. We've mentioned it in several podcasts. So knowing about this shift that happens, and a lot of that intel referenced is me checking my trail cameras that are normally on scrapes or field edges or things like that. And then there is a disappearance of all of these these bucks that have been around all summer long, right? There's some kind of shift. So knowing that, back in late July, early August, I went out and I hung trail cameras in the timber, in some well-used trails, in some terrain features that just have good deer travel, downwind of some bedding areas. And then I went ahead and yesterday I broke my own rule that I always say, stay out until you're getting ready to hunt.
Yeah.
I broke that rule just to check trail cameras. And wouldn't you know, if we would have had this podcast yesterday or the day before, I would have said, man, there's nothing really there to get me fired up quite yet.
Okay.
But after yesterday, checking these trail cameras, and not only running into really good sign, but locating deer on some of those way back in the timber trail cameras that I went and checked, things are looking good for this upcoming year.
Nice. All right. That's good news. So give me the Iowa rundown then. So based on what you saw or what you didn't see this summer, but what you're now seeing here in October, do you have any returnees? Do you have anyone who's back from last year that's going to be at the top of your list?
Yeah, I got one 4-year-old who is, I think he's like an 11-pointer. Nothing crazy. And I'll tell you this, you heard me talk earlier this year, and I think maybe even last year a little bit, about how the number of mature deer just aren't here anymore like they used to. I'm not sure what the change is.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's EHD. I don't know if it's pressure, whatever. Last year and this year have just not been the same as previous. And with everything that I'm about to say, it's still a well below average year for the properties that I hunt. And that includes some of the public that I have trail cameras on as well. So with that said, I think I counted this weekend. There's four, I'm guessing 4-year-olds. One might be a 5-year-old that are running around on the farm that I hunted, and I only got to check half the farm. I wasn't able to get to the second half of the farm. So
nice.
Yeah. So
that's solid. So you got this 11-pointer that's back.
Yep.
Anything of the others? Anything notable? Any of them that are like super frequent or daylight, or anyone that you've really got your hopes pinned on?
Yeah. So all of them, just because I've been back in the timber in the thick areas, I got daylight pictures of all of them. So the thing about it is knowing, like, one of the pictures just kind of random, which makes me feel that the camera is hung close to where he beds, is like a noon on a fairly warm day in October.
Wow.
He's up on his feet. So maybe he got jumped, but there's been no pressure back there that I can tell. maybe a coyote jumped him. Maybe he stood up to stretch his legs and, walk around for a little bit. I don't know. But we have, and it's hard to tell. One could be a returning customer. He's just a giant 150 class 8-pointer with like a dagger coming out of his base. About, I'd say, 3 or 4 inches. So he's a big 8-pointer. That's around there. But, who knows if he's a return customer or not, because it's hard to. I'd have to go through and dig on some cameras. Other than that, man, just a nice clean 150 class 10, and then another 145 to 50 class, rough guess, 9-pointer, who's really wide, but he's the one that might be the 5-year-old. He's got a pretty big body.
Sweet. So what's the game plan there then? Do you have your usual rutcation time period that you're going to save it for, or what's the hunt strategy at a high level?
Yeah, so Friday of this week I leave for South Dakota, and I'm there for a while, and then I'll come back, play catch up at home. Like, it's really hard to get out during the week with the amount of activities that the kids have. Next week, the week after next, actually, things start to die down and the fall activities start to stop, which means that I'll be able to get out during the second half of the week. So my wife works Mondays and Tuesdays. And of course, the weekends, really, the next weekend that I'm going to be able to hunt is probably the Friday and Saturday, the 29th and 30th of October. And then I have Halloween on Sunday, and then it's from there. It's just kind of game time. You know what I mean? I probably won't hunt much the first 3 days of November, but the closer to that end of the week, that's when I'll probably head down to the main farm. While I'm up here, though, I'll be hunting on the farm that's close to my house, and then some of the public that's in the area. This late summer, me and my son saw a really good 150-inch 10-pointer working this bean field. So I think he's in the area. And I don't know, man. It's like I really haven't been thinking. I've actually been trying to curb my excitement, because I know if I take one step too close, then it's over. And then I'm thinking, all I'm doing is thinking about hunting when I need to be focusing on the work, on the family, before I go crazy and just disappear.
Well, do you not feel any temptation after pulling those cameras yesterday and getting daylight pictures of those bucks recently? Like, knowing that you could slip right back in there where they were daylight. If they're daylight, what are you waiting for?
Yeah, exactly.
Has that flashed through your mind?
Yeah, it's the first thing that passed through my mind when I saw the picture. Yeah. It's just like, oh, hey, this guy's daylight. And then I got a couple other of those shooter caliber deer are on like, I would say 45 minutes before dark, 30 minutes before dark, or even coming back to their bed in daylight. Wow. So I would say like 30 minutes after like legal shooting light. So they're there, they're moving. It's just, what do I want to do? Do I want to go right now and try to get on these deer? Or I guess what I'm doing is I'm playing the numbers game, right? The hunting is going to be better in November. There's going to be more movement in November. Yeah, the chaos of the rut could really screw me, and these deer could just disappear and follow a doe into a different farm or whatever. But I would rather stick to the schedule, not throw any curveballs to the wife, than get out and go isolate where I don't have any problem. She knows that I'm gone, right? It's not something that's surprise, like, hey, you mind if I go hunt 3 days to chase this deer? Because what happens is, and I think we've all been here before, is we start to hunt too early and we go hard. You don't get your deer. And now what? Now you're forced to hunt the rut. And then towards the end of this time that you've dedicated previously, then the patience starts to wear off. Yeah. And then it's just like, hey, you've been hunting for 3 weeks now instead of 2. What's going on? Hey, I need some help. And then that patience, it's like, I don't know, man. It happens every single year.
Yeah, you got to walk that tightrope real careful.
Yep.
And you've got these other trips. So mule deer in Nebraska and mule deer in South Dakota, right?
Yep. I'm done with the mule deer in. Well, actually, it was a mule deer whitetail hunt because we were hunting mule deer in the mornings. They were coming off one chunk of public onto another chunk of public to bed for like 30 minutes in the morning. So you had to catch them as they started to come through. But then in the evenings, I found a buck bed, and I watched this buck 2 days in a row stand up out of the same bed. And the first night I went out there, it was just I was sitting over a green field that was on private. So I was on public, watching the deer kind of funnel out towards the green field. And so that's when I saw that whitetail buck stand out of his bed. Then the next night, I went right back to the same place, but I closed like 120 yards on him. And I had the wind in my favor. I know he couldn't see me, but I was at like 40 yards on a frontal, and he was looking right in my direction, feeding. And I put my heel down, and it was windy up top, but down in the bottom, it was real quiet. And it was a small twig, but it sounded like someone broke a baseball bat.
And that was it.
And it was, I mean, I'll tell you, I don't know what's your experience with this. Spookiness of whitetails in the out west. I feel like it's crazy. They're like, they don't take any risks compared to like a Midwest whitetail. Even the deer in Michigan, when I had those encounters in Michigan, hung around for just a little bit to kind of like put their nose up and stomp. But the deer out there, he didn't see me. He didn't have my wind. He heard a noise he didn't like. He was gone like in 10 seconds. There was no screwing around for them.
He must have been having some people bugging him for a while leading up to that. Sounds like he was on edge.
I don't know. Every whitetail I see out there is like that. But I mean, I got close. I was like one step away from drawing back on him, and it didn't. And it was great for a Nebraska deer. It's like a 130-inch 10-pointer, man. It was a beautiful 3-year-old.
That's sweet. So then going into this South Dakota hunt, what's the goal for that? You had a tough Nebraska hunt that didn't go the way you wanted. I know you last year, kind of a tough one. So are you going to shoot anything? Are you trying to get a buck? Like where are you at?
You know how it goes. The first, I say to myself, oh man, first thing that moves, I'm going to get it. But I get out there, and then I'm just like, all right, we're going after a buck for the first couple days. And then the first couple days go by, and I didn't get no shot opportunities on a buck. And now you're like, okay, it's getting close to the end. I'm going to go shoot a doe. Well, then the buck shows up the last couple days. Then you go after the bucks, and then here you are. It's the last hunt of the entire trip. And now you're like, okay, I got to get something now. I want to go get a doe. And then the does don't show up. So
brutal. But that's, so you're going to ride with that usual plan that always works so well for us, right?
Oh yeah. Yep. I'll probably shoot myself in the foot like I did the last 3 times I went to South Dakota. But man, I just love it out there. And I wanted to hunt a different time of year. Like a lot of people go out the first 2 weeks of, to any Western type, they try to get the opener. And I wanted to kind of wait and get closer towards November. So hopefully there might be some kind of additional movement, cooler temps, I don't know, man. I'm just excited for this trip like I always am.
I can see why. It seems like even though, it hasn't quite come together yet, you guys are always in beautiful country. You've seen some really good deer out there. I know that one year your buddy smashed a dandy. So this is your time.
Yep. Hopefully.
So is there anything else in your schedule other than that? You'll come back, do the Iowa thing. Is that basically a wrap?
Yeah. I mean, unless last year the wife was cool with me going to South Dakota again in December, but that was with only one trip last year. That was only South Dakota. I didn't do anything in September. So we'll see. We'll see how happy she is after right before Christmas or whatever the deal is. And I don't know, man. but I've been taking care of her, taking her out to dinners and doing those brownie points, doing some projects around the house. And I think that's completely underrated, like taking care of the home. Like people just live a normal life, and then it's all of a sudden it's hunting season. They don't prepare their family for it, and then it's just chaos at home, and then you can't hunt. You can't hunt happily.
Oh yeah.
And so I don't know, man.
Gotta get that balance right. Gotta invest ahead of time.
Yeah.
In certain ways.
Yep. But I will say one thing. All right. So I think it was 2007. No, it would have been 16.
Ooh, way back in the golden days.
Yeah, way back. So I had this bottom field, and I can't remember. I think you might have came down there with me when you shed hunted that farm.
Yep.
It's way down in the bottom, and it was a cornfield the year that you came down to shed hunt it. But so what happens was they fertilize it, they plant it, and then I think early on it flooded. And
I remember this.
All of the crops died. And so the fertilizer's in the ground, the water goes away, the seeds are rotten, it's too wet to replant. And now throughout the summer, these weeds have grown to this 6 foot high-ish type area, like size. And the last time that happened, that farm, that part of the farm was stacked with deer. Like, I mean, one of the greatest ruts that I ever had out on that farm. And although I shot my deer that year up higher on the farm, it still held a lot of great deer. And so that happened again this summer.
Nice.
And so I'm excited to get back there and see what I put 2 more trail cameras up in that area yesterday. And so when I start the rotation, I'll go check those cameras and kind of see what's going on, and hopefully it's a repeat of that year.
That's great news.
Yeah,
it's exciting. Well,
yeah,
2021, man, big mule deer in South Dakota, big old giant in Iowa, and then you'll somehow convince your wife to let you go back out to Nebraska and you'll kill that whitey. That's my prediction for your year.
I'll tell you what, if I killed a deer in Minnesota, or excuse me, in South Dakota, and killed a good one in Iowa, there's no chance I'm going back to South Dakota or Nebraska, because she'd be like, haven't you had enough?
Yeah.
Like, I think you've had enough, right? You've had enough success for this year. So
fair enough. We can dream, right?
Yeah, right. Something bad would have to happen. Like she'd have to go into a coma for a while for me to go on that trip.
Gosh. Well, I'm gonna hope it's just a $2 year then for you, buddy, for the sake of your wife.
Well, I'm not saying like anything bad would happen, because you hear stories like that, right? Where, oh no, someone slipped into a coma for a month and then they popped out of it and they're fine. You hear stories like that.
No, I've never once heard a story though where someone's wife goes into a coma and the husband says, "Well, I guess I might as well go hunting." Never heard that one, Dan.
Well, someone would have to take care of the kids. I might pull them out of school and they might just live in the truck. But
you are horrible.
No, I'm not horrible. I'm just trying to. Because technically this is my job, and I think that if
this is what she would want you to do, right?
Exactly. Let me ask you a question.
What?
If one of your if Furter's wife slipped into a coma and he was having a hard time dealing with it, wouldn't you say, "Hey, Furter, maybe you should go hunting to relieve your stress"?
I mean, I might say go out for a night and I'll hang out at the hospital.
Okay.
But I don't know if I would take off like a 2-week trip or a week-long trip to South Dakota.
That's too much. I mean, let's think about it, Mark. She's not going anywhere.
Oh gosh. So horrible. Oh man.
I hope she never slips into a coma.
I really hope that she does not as well. And I know you take good care of her. I know she's a smart lady and a healthy lady. So knock on wood, we should be okay.
There you go.
So anyways, hunting.
Yeah. So wait a second. are you like, where's your level at right now? Because I'm middle of the road. I'm sitting probably at a 5 or a 6 for whitetails in Iowa. I leave Friday. I'm at probably a 9 right now for South Dakota mule deer. Where are you sitting at for your upcoming adventures?
I'm in like a weird place, Dan. I'm at like a concerned 6.
A concerned 6.
Yeah. So let me paint you the picture of my world this fall. And I think we talked about this a little bit offline, but I'll spell it all out for everyone. And the reason I have some trepidation is because it's by far the craziest fall I've ever had. And so it's just gonna be tough on the family life and my sanity as well. So I did this public land whitetail hunt in Idaho at the beginning of the year that me and Furter did together. And tough hunt, had some close calls, just didn't quite come together. But cool. And then Michigan, of course, opened up on October 1st, so I've got that going on. And in a second here, I can give you some details on what deer I'm hunting there and what happened the first couple days of the season. But the big wild card is that I'm filming 2 new shows this year that are requiring that I travel a ton. So one of these shows, the basic gist, if I were to like oversimplify it, is kind of taking the Wired Hunt podcast idea on the road and filming it. So the idea here is that I go and I meet with some expert in deer hunting that has like a very specific, unique angle on how they hunt and the unique place they hunt. And I'm going to go out and visit with this person and spend a day or 2 with them, basically doing a podcast, but in real life. So following along with them to learn how they do what they do, asking them why they do this. Why is this the spot? Why do you use this bow? Why do you think about it this way? Why is this location right? And go through the whole thing and actually tag along for a hunt with them and break it all down. So try to learn as much as I can, dissect their approach, just like what we do here. But then I have to take what I learned over that day and a half, and then I need to try to pull off the hunt myself. So now I have to go off on my own, taking what I learned from this expert, and I'm in their area now. So there's new country, new spots, new techniques, and I have to try to guinea pig it and implement it and try to kill a deer. So that's the thing I'm trying to do this fall across 6 different places for this show this season. And then in between all of that, I'm also filming a different show, which is focused on just one single week in Iowa. So I've got that hunt first week in November, which will be kind of a standard 7 days of hunting nonstop in the rut. So that's one thing. But then this other show has got a hunt that I just finished. I just got home late last night from Washington, D.C. I was chasing suburban bucks and suburban does with Taylor Chamberlain out in the suburbs, which was a very interesting, wild, insane trip that I'm going to have in another podcast, the details of it, but I'll just tell you it was like nuts. So that was a learning experience. And then I'm going to Arkansas next week. So in like 6 days, I leave for Arkansas, and I'm going to go out there with Clay Newcomb, and we're going to be learning from one of his like mountain man type mentors, all about how kind of the old school mountain man way of deer hunting from the ground with a muzzle loader out in the mountains and national forests and stuff. So we're going to take mules back into some random place in Arkansas, live out there for a week and chase deer on the ground like that. And then I'm home for 6-7 days, and then I take off for that Iowa hunt that I just described. And then I leave immediately from that hunt to go out to Nebraska and go hunt the open country grassland type stuff with a guy named Tony Treach, who has perfected kind of a similar thing to what Travis is going to talk about today on the podcast, which is killing these deer with a bow on the ground using a decoy. So I want to try that myself now. And then I come home for a week, and then I go to Maine, and I'm meeting up with Hale Blood, and I'm gonna learn how to track deer in the snow and try to follow their tracks right to the buck standing there and get a crack at him with a rifle. And that's gonna be crazy and interesting. And then I'm home for a week, and then I've got another one that I still tentative, so I can't lay out details, but I think it looks like I'm going to be going to Alabama for a very interesting hunt in early December. And then in early January, going to Wisconsin for another interesting one where we will be taking a unique look and meeting with a unique person out there, kind of putting the lens back on the more common, like Midwestern management world of deer hunting, but from an interesting perspective, and doing a hunt there. So it's just a lot of travel and a lot of like quick hunts. Like I've got like a day and a half with these people learning about what they do, and then I have like 3.5 days to try to do it myself. So it's exciting. Like I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to see a lot of interesting things, but that trepidation is, it's going to be really hard to actually get anything killed in these kinds of situations. And it's just going to be a tough fall from balancing family and travel and all that kind of stuff. So that's the crazy I've got staring me in the face right now.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you rather, obviously you're not really 100% in control of all of the places that you're going. I mean, it sounds like if you had your way, you might spend some more time in some places. So the question I have for you is, would you rather hunt 5 states at 3 days at a pop, or maybe 2 or 3 states at 5 to 7 days at a pop?
I mean, if it was just like to try to kill a good buck, like if I weren't doing the show and if it was just for like my own goals of killing a good buck, definitely fewer states, longer period, 100%. The trick is that we're, trying to get, a certain number of episodes, right? And that's the trick with it. And I don't want to be gone a crazy amount of time because I'm trying to make sure that I'm not always gone. So it's like I need more. I'd ideally like more hunting days, but at the same time, I don't want to be away from the family more too. So it's I think what it's going to come down to is that I'm going to be, I'm not going to be targeting big giant bucks, right? It's going to be more so I'm going to learn about this style of hunting, and if I can get a crack at a doe, I'll be stoked. If I can get a crack at a 2-year-old buck or 3-year-old buck, I'll be stoked. And I think I'm looking at this fall as much more of I'm going to learn a ton, and hopefully this will be a tool to teach people a lot. And I'm not going to get down on myself if I don't shoot a bunch of big old bucks, because that's just not the thing I'm going for this year. So it's going to be different. Yeah.
Well, I hope you find success, my friend. And it sounds like you're going to have some help, at least from some quote unquote experts that are going to help point you in the right direction.
Oh yeah. I mean, awesome people to learn from in person. And I mean, it's going to be really interesting digging into what these people do and how they do it. So if nothing else, I'm going to come out of the season with a totally new perspective, having hunted all these different places in all these different ways, which, is going to be a good thing in the long run. Yeah. I just don't know what it's going to mean for how many tags I fill, or like if I can roll out of bed on January 1st and like walk, but we'll see. But I do think I feel good about the Iowa hunt. I mean, I've got some stuff that I knocked on doors a number of years ago that I have access to again. I've got a buddy's property. He's going to let me slip in there if I need to. So there's a couple spots where I think I can get something. I can get a decent deer in Iowa. I'm excited about that. And, on the local stuff in Michigan, I've got a couple good bucks that made it from last year. So I feel, even though I won't have a lot of time to put into those, I think maybe just be a little more targeted and hopefully take advantage of, a lot of historical data on those deer. I've got 3 bucks from last year, 2 bucks for sure that I wanted to target this year that I passed last year a bunch. There's this really nice 12-pointer who I believe is 4. And I was calling him Rookie of the Year last year, and he's back and been very daylight. And then there's another big 8-pointer who I passed a bunch last year. He's back. He's probably like 130-something inch 4-year-old, which is a really good one for around here. I have pictures of him in early September, but I haven't checked pictures of him on a cell camera. I haven't checked any regular cameras, so I don't know if he's anywhere else. And then there's this wild card buck. There's this short tine 9-pointer from last year who I thought was 2 last year. So I assumed he'd be a 3-year-old this year and that I wouldn't be interested in hunting him. But I've seen him a couple times now, including opening night and the next day in the morning. And then I saw him again last night. I got out for a little glassing session and saw him. And he looks like a tank. I mean, he's not big bodied. He's like short. He's a short but very wide 9-pointer, kind of like that wide 8-pointer I shot in the back 40 a couple of years ago. But his body does not look like a 3-year-old. So I don't know if he just has an abnormally really big body and he is actually 3, or if I misjudged him last year and he was actually 3 last year and just wasn't very impressive antler wise. So I undersold on him. And then this year he is a big chunky 4-year-old, and I don't know. I'm gonna if he comes in and he looks as good up close, I might be very tempted to send one at him, because these pictures I'm getting of him on the cell camera and then just kind of seeing him running through a couple times, he looks good. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah. So
awesome.
There's some exciting stuff. That very first night of the season, I got a cell cam picture of that 12-pointer of Rookie the night before in daylight at one of my spots. So I made a move, aggressively went in there with a saddle, set up on that spot, hoping he'd come through, and he didn't, but he showed up with that short, wide 9 about 120 yards away. And so I saw them go by that night, and then the next morning I couldn't hunt, but I could glass, and I watched them go right by that same spot in the morning back to bed. So the second night of the season, I went in, walked a creek in back behind this thick brushy stuff and got right up in like the edge of where I think they're bedded, slipped in there during a rainstorm, climbed up in the tree right where they passed by the night before and that morning. And I was thinking, man, this is it. Perfect. And then they didn't show. So you know how that goes.
That's how it is.
Yeah. So it was a fun first couple days of the season, and felt like I was in the game on them. So that was all I've done in Michigan so far. And I don't know if I'm going to hunt at all this week because of the fact I'm, leaving again so soon. So it might be take this week off and not hunting again until late October for those deer. But that's what I got here in Michigan. If I don't kill them in late October, it's going to be like a late season thing because November is so busy. So that's my story, man. It's going to be a different kind of year, different kind of goals, hopes, and hit lists this year for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm sending good vibes your way, man.
I do appreciate it. I hope that South Dakota goes well, so you don't have to have this really weird situation play out, so you can finagle an extra way to get back down there.
Mr. Johnson, we found you Google searched how to put your wife in a coma. That's illegal. Okay.
Yeah, that would be one time I'd be okay with the NSA snooping in to make sure you don't go one step too far with your hunting obsession.
Hey, I got a question for you. Does Rookie of the Year have a sweet goatee?
See, I knew you'd like this. He's got some interesting facial hair. I wouldn't say it's a sweet goatee like I've got, but he does have like a white patch on his forehead. So there's a little something there. Makes him...
Because that's your nickname.
I know. I'm applying it to a buck. So, yeah buddy.
Hey, I hope you hit him with the curve.
I'm gonna give it my best shot, and I hope the same for you, man. Thanks for hopping on here quick to do this today. I know that folks have been asking where's the goals, hopes, and hit list conversation. We need to know what you two are doing. So we did it. It's out there, and if anything weird goes on in Iowa, they can point back to this as far as what do they call motive for the crime? Yeah. And it's all out there for the world to see. So we're good.
Now I definitely can't put my wife into a coma because this is all like, now it's premeditated.
Oh gosh. Okay. We to make it clear, Dan Johnson would never do anything ill-advised. He's a wonderful family man, a great dad and husband, and we believe that you have only the best of intentions, right, my friend?
Only the best intentions.
Only the best intentions. Well, good luck in South Dakota, and when you get going in Iowa, I know you'll be keeping me posted. I can't wait to hear how it goes.
Same to you, man.
All right, and with that all said, let's get into the next phase of this podcast, which is talking ground game for whitetails with Travis Glassman.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition. of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
All right, I am here now with Travis Glassman. Travis, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mark, for having me.
I'm excited for this one, as I think probably our listeners should know by now. I can't remember if I've mentioned this or not, because my life's crazy these days, but I am heading out to the plains of Nebraska this year, and I'm going to do some ground hunting for whitetails with my bow. And in preparation for that, I've been digging in and researching different people that have done this and looking into different ways of doing it and exploring all that. And your name was one that kept popping up as a guy that has got this thing nailed down. You figured out how to kill whitetails on the ground with a bow. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So my question first for you, Travis, is how did this thing start for you? Because I actually started hunting whitetails on the ground with a bow too, but it was because my mom wouldn't let her little son Mark sit in the tree stand at the time, so I was forced to be on the ground.
Yeah.
Why did you go to the ground? Is it? Well, I won't try to answer for you. How did it begin for you?
Okay, so I too, back in Clear Up when I started bow hunting, I was about 15 years old. I was very lucky to have a buddy who took me along with him, and I didn't even have a bow. I went along, and him and his dad hunted a little bit of private, some public here in Kansas, and they primarily hunted tree stands. And so I learned too the whole tree stand game, and we don't have as many trees. I live in the western part of Kansas, so it's a lot of open spaces, but there are trees here and there in some of the drainages and whatnot. And so we would always look for those areas to hunt and set up a tree stand. And I've spent a lot of hours in a tree stand myself, and always saw a lot of deer, mostly does and young bucks, and wondered always why I never consistently saw mature bucks in those wooded areas. And over the years, I just kind of started paying attention, and then where the turning point was why I had a buddy take me along and kind of introduce me to the run and gun, spot and stock kind of decoy game, and at that point I was hooked on that, and I really started digging in and honing my own way of doing it. And so, yes, I mean, a couple of different points we can cover is, ground setup as far as ground blinds, stuff like that. And then also how I approach ground hunting and spot and stock and run and gun and whatnot. So, to answer your question, I started out tree stand hunting, and then I realized real quick that to consistently kill and see the biggest bucks, because of our terrain out here, the big bucks like to separate themselves from the bigger herds or the does or the small bucks or whatever. They're very much, to themselves, and that's how they survive. The bigger mature bucks, the only time they're around the other deer from what I've seen is one at night, because they are doing their scent checking and figuring out when things are getting close to the rut and whatnot. But, for the most part, when they're just living their lives, they don't really like to hang out with a lot of other deer. And so during the rut, we all find get a whole bunch of trail camera pictures through the night of mature bucks and coming through all of our tree stand areas, but never or rarely see them during the daytime. And so that's when I started kind of taking a step back, and basically those areas where I hunted, I'll either set up a observation stand to, see a lot of country first thing in the morning or last light. And usually, you see those mature deer standing up somewhere. It may be, half mile out in the middle of a CRP field, or in one little tiny patch of brush in a fence line that's way away from everything else. And you realize real quick that they're never going to make it to your tree stand by shooting light or during shooting light. So, in those circumstances, you have to go to them in order to kill them. So what I would start doing is figuring out a pattern from an observation stand, or sitting up on a hill watching behind a spotting scope for a few days or mornings or whatever. So just taking a step back is a huge benefit, and just being very patient behind your glass and then coming up with a really good game plan. And then at that point, it's really kind of a natural thing to me is either, one, you set up a ground blind in a travel corridor that's very near their bedding area, or during the rut, say they have a doe that they've found through the night and they've separated off and taken out into these wide open spaces. And of course, they're going to bed those does down, and they're going to defend that doe for the whole time that they're breeding them. And when they're satisfied, they'll obviously go on to the next. But as observing from a long ways away, watching how these big bucks act, and you hopefully will get to see that. I'm not sure the exact time frame that you're going to Nebraska, but
it'll be November.
Okay. Well, you should see I'm guessing you'll see younger bucks that smell the hot doe, and they will be coming in and trying to follow their nose to do what they do. They're there to breed does. So, hopefully you find a situation where you have a dominant buck bedded down with a doe, pinned down, and they'll stand up randomly, throughout the day, and they'll just kind of scent check her and make sure that no other bucks are approaching. And then they'll obviously fight to keep that doe. Well, that is the single most important thing to focus on as far as killing a big mature buck. And why I say that is take advantage of his high testosterone, his aggressiveness. And I like to use a decoy, and specifically I use heads up decoys just because they're manufactured here close to where I live, and I've become good friends with Garrett. But anyway, I'll take a buck decoy, and I'll get the wind right, and then I'll kind of sneak in within, 80 yards, or, try to get as close as you can, and then present that decoy. And because that buck is defending his doe, he is likely going to come and try to defend that doe, and he's going to try to whoop your tail, So once I get within that range where I feel like it's a good time to present the decoy, I'll do that, and then usually just be patient. Reactions are going to be different. Sometimes it is instant, where you better be 100% ready with an arrow nocked and everything prepared, because sometimes it happens very quick. And sometimes they'll stand up and they'll look at you, and they'll just kind of, see you. And as long as you're far enough away, they're okay with that. And it may be that, eventually when they get up, especially if the doe gets up and kind of feeds around a little bit, and if she happens to see the decoy and is curious and kind of starts coming your way, then he'll, start getting aggressive at that point and try to get between you and the doe and potentially try to come, push you out. And so it happens differently each time, it seems like. And, but yeah, you just have to be adaptive and behind the decoy and whatnot. And we can go into kind of mounting and the decoy and whatnot. So, yeah.
So I want to hit pause there because I want to get really deep into how you do this decoy thing. But before we get to that, I want to rewind a little bit more to the beginning and kind of answer a few questions that I know people are having listening to this. Specifically, people that maybe are hunting further to the east or in the Midwest, and they've been told their whole lives that, well, you can't kill a buck on the ground because you're at eye level with them, or they're just too spooky, or your wind's going to be in their face, or it's hard to see stuff, or whatever it might be. There's all these downsides to hunting on the ground, and for a lot of years, I was hearing those things too and thinking to myself, man, you got to be in a tree. You got to be in a tree. But now you've done this, and you've been on the ground in blinds, you've been spot and stalking, you've used decoys, you've spent a ton of time on the ground. So when you hear those objections, what do you say to those objections? Is there truth to it, or is it a lot of worry and concern about nothing?
No, there's definitely a lot of concern about nothing. And to be real honest with you, I know that there are people listening who have had that moment where they're sitting in a tree stand and then they see a buck bedded down, locked down with a doe, and they sit there and they think there's about a 10% chance or less of that deer standing up and walking by, but you're darn sure going to put in the time because you have faith, you have hope, right?
This sounds like me a time or two.
If even in heavily wooded areas, if you have a small opening to where you can see a deer bedded, if you have any terrain at all to be able to stalk closer, especially with having a decoy in front of you, I would highly encourage climbing down as quietly as you can and start the stalk and get that decoy presented to that deer, because again, his instinct is to protect what he's got. And by him seeing a decoy, and even if you incorporate a grunt tube, by giving some vocalizations along, so you have a sound and you have a visual with the decoy, then you have movement with the decoy because you have it in your hand. Those three things he will not be able to resist. I'm going to say 95% of the time. Are you going to have situations where something doesn't go quite right, or if a doe sees you on your way and busts out and messes up the whole thing? Yes. But the chances of you killing that deer are way, way higher than that deer standing up and walking by you in your tree stand, is my argument. And so I'm going to try it every single time. Obviously, I'm going to use my hunting instincts to get myself in the right position, make sure the wind's right, make sure you don't see any other deer on your way. And I mean, it's all those things. But that's how I handle that situation. I encourage people all the time that don't think that this is an option for them. It's just too thick. And I understand some people hunt strictly woods and it's extremely difficult, maybe impossible. But if you have any openness at all, don't rule it out, is all I would say.
All right. So that seems fair. And I think you've convinced me that this is something that could work, in certain spots in Michigan or Mississippi or New York, just as much as it could work in Kansas. You just need to kind of pick your spots and your times, right? So
right.
I do want to get into general open country stuff eventually. I do want to get into some of your experiences with ground blinds, but since we're talking about the decoy, moving in on them, let's just get into that. Let's cover that in detail. Let's start there. Okay. So you mentioned that you use a heads-up decoy. For people that don't know what that is, can you describe specifically like what this thing is, how it works? Because some people probably aren't following you. They're thinking you're carrying a big 20-pound 3D thing out there.
Sure. So heads up decoy is just a silhouette of a deer. I know some people may know what a silhouette looks like. Montana decoy makes like a full body silhouette, but heads up decoy made one that's more mobile to where it's only from like the neck up. And it's I know when you look at it, you're thinking, man, is that enough? Is that enough to convince deer that you're a deer? And think about this, a lot of times whenever a deer is standing in any sort of cover at all you see is the front shoulders up a lot of times. And at first I was honestly skeptical when I first seen it and started using it. And I actually, again, luckily had a guy, kind of had some good experiences with it before and showed me. And then once you see it, you have to experience it and understand it and to convince yourself that it's the best idea. And so anyway, to answer your question, it's a heads up decoy is a silhouette showing a deer looking your direction. And they make deer and antelope and elk and moose and whatever. But anyway, I focus obviously on deer, and we thankfully have the option out here where I live to experience mule deer and whitetail hunting. So I use both, but for this, talking about whitetails, I primarily use the whitetail buck decoy, just because I take advantage of their aggression towards other bucks. But there are circumstances with mule deer I like to use a doe, but we can talk about that at a later time. So that is what a heads up decoy is, and I encourage everybody to either search it or you can look at my YouTube channel or the heads up decoy YouTube channel or whatever you want to do. But yeah, you'll see.
Now how do you just hand hold it and stick it in the ground, or do you use a bow attachment ever? Talk about that.
Sure. So there are different options. They do have a bow mount that you can screw onto the port where your stabilizer goes. Some stabilizers have a hole on the end of the stabilizer that you can mount it to your stabilizer, or you can remove your stabilizer, put this mount in place, or you can kind of put it behind your stabilizer. So you just have to play with what works best for you if you want to have it on your bow. Now, if I was in an area where I knew things were going to happen up close and personal, and there's not a lot of wind, I would not hesitate to put it on my bow, just because, you kind of have it hanging off to the side. So like, say I'm a right-handed shooter, the decoy would kind of come up and to the left, like it's, a neck kind of curves up kind of at a 45-degree angle. And then obviously the head goes straight up. So anyway, I would use that on the left-hand side to where when I'm getting ready to draw, the bulk of my body, my shoulders are behind that decoy. And then I would, have my decoy in the my bow in the vertical position to where I'm ready to draw at any time. But out here where I'm at, a lot of times it's pretty windy. And so I choose not to put it on my bow most of the time. So I actually kind of built my own stand or stake. And I know Garrett with Heads Up is kind of currently working on some different ways to do what I'm doing, only make a, manufactured stake. But anyway, I'll take the bow mount and I'll actually bolt it to kind of like a plastic hot wire fence stake or something you get from the farm and home store.
Yep.
And it's got kind of a metal stake to it, and you can poke it down in the ground, and then you can prevent it from rotating and stuff. So I'll put that down. You have to cut those down a little bit and make them about 30 inches tall or so. And then you screw that bow mount to it, and then you can slide that decoy into that bow mount. And then you can just carry it off to your side, just like, you would a bow or anything. You just carrying it along. And then when it's time to put that thing up, you just, put it out in front of you, and say you're walking in somewhere. And a lot of times I'll just have it, I'll have my bow in my left hand and the decoy in the right hand already on that stake, to where if I'm walking into, say, a place where I want to set up to present a decoy, or say I'm walking into a ground blind setup, even if I don't plan on using that decoy for the hunt in the ground blind, I'll have it with me to where I'll just sit it out beside the blind or something, to where if I see a buck bedded down 200 yards away, I'm out of the blind and we're going, And so, or I like using it just to cover my movement. So if I'm sneaking into a tree stand or a ground blind, how many times have you had a doe stand up and stare you down, and then you hit a knee and you're like, please don't bust me, And so if you have something like that, even if you're out in the prairie mule deer hunting, I'll have a doe decoy that I'm carrying, to where if I hit a knee, if I see something moving or whatever, I'll hit a knee and have that thing up in front of my face, to where a lot of times I get by with it. They dismiss you and they just kind of think, oh, okay, well, that's what that noise was, is another deer, and then they'll just kind of work off, and you can sneak, the rest of the way into your tree stand. So anyway, yeah, that's how I use it. I like to have it on that stake, just because when I'm working into an area where I want to, kind of set up my perch to present the decoy, again, there's kind of that sweet spot where I feel you don't want to get too close to the deer to present it, or when you present it, just because when they stand up, they may be startled that, oh, there's a deer way too close, and that was in your face, So I like to kind of have a little softer approach, to where I kind of set up a spot around, 75 yards or so. And, but anyways, I will stick that thing in the ground and just kind of hide behind it and kind of clear out the area around me, to where I'm ready to maneuver and shoot on either side of the decoy. And the good thing about having it on that stake is you can kind of reach over and rotate that decoy. So like, as sometimes they'll try to circle downwind, and obviously you're going to need to make a decision to make a shot before they completely get downwind. But you can kind of rotate that decoy as they're turning, and you can just kind of rotate your body and the whole decoy setup to where you're always going to be hidden behind it. So that's why I like having hands free. Plus, when you pull your bow back, you're going to be leaning around the decoy to shoot or whatever, but you're completely hands free and you don't have that thing hanging on your bow.
Yeah.
But there are circumstances where I do feel like having it on your bow is really nice, because you're always going to be tucked in tight behind that decoy when it's on your bow too. So there's give and take to about every circumstance,
As you're describing that, one of the things that I am curious about actually happens before that whole presentation of the decoy. It's actually the question, or the situation of, when do you start trying to make your approach? Because we're assuming like we've spotted a buck that you want to shoot, and I guess this is another question. Will you ever make a move on a buck with the decoy like this if he's solo, or do you only ever use this when he's locked on a doe, and it's one of those very specific buck on a doe trying to breed her kind of situations? Will you chase down a cruising buck or something like that, or is that a lost cause?
No, a solo buck is, I don't know if I want to say equally as effective, but you have a high percentage that he'll come in and take a look at you and probably challenge you, just because what are we focusing on at this time? That time of year, we're testosterone, right? So They're very territorial. They want to be the boss at all times, and they're going to see that decoy and they're going to say, this guy's in my area cruising for the does that I'm cruising for, and I'm going to make sure he gets out of here. So that's going to be the mentality that I have all the time. Now, I will warn folks, there have been times where, if there's a buck and say he's a 3 or 4 year old buck, if you approach him with this decoy, you may make him go the other direction, just because that tells you, one, he's not the dominant buck in the area. He's probably got his tail whooped already. But the way I look at it is, if there's a buck that goes the other direction because he's been whooped, is that the deer that I want?
Right.
I focus on the most mature buck in the area and one that's very confident in that. And so that's what I like keying in on.
Do you ever Do you ever see young bucks coming in? Because I've seen young bucks come into regular decoys. So if I want to kill a 2-year-old, or even like if I was out there just need to kill a buck of any type to fill a freezer, could I kill one like this?
It is not out of the question ever for any age class of deer to come to a decoy. Are they going to be a little more reluctant or careful? Absolutely. But a lot of times a deer is a deer and they're social animals. They want to know who it is. And so usually you're going to have a reaction. They're going to circle in and scent check or take a look or whatever. So, it's not out of the question, but just don't be disappointed if, how many times have you grunted or called at a buck and he goes the other direction because he's been down that road before.
More times than not.
So exactly. So, I was just warning folks, don't be disappointed and say, oh, throw the decoy in the air and say, this doesn't work. So
I'm wondering also, like, when do you know it's time to go? So let's imagine you're up glassing on a hill. In your case, you're hunting open country. You're up on a hill. You've been glassing. You spot a buck. Do you see that buck and then it's like, go, okay, right now we got to go get him? Or do you watch a while and try to let them bed or try to get them to slow down? And then once you know where they kind of slowed down, then you try to make a move. Can you walk me through that thought process? Because I think that's probably a big fork in the road point for people.
It's certainly a big, it could make or break the whole deal. And what I tell people is anytime they cannot see you, say you need to cover ground, and it's just like a spot and stalk situation without a decoy. When are you going to make your move? Well, whenever they can't see you. So if they go into a thicket for a short time, there's been times where I've sprinted and I've told people with me, I'll prepare them, say, okay, listen, they're about to go down in this ravine. And as soon as they get out of sight, we're going to sprint to that next yucca plant, or we're going to sprint to that next fence line, or whatever it is. And so it's chess match, and you're constantly doing this until you're within that zone where you want to present that decoy. And you have to use your hunting instincts, and there's no magic potion or right answer, because every single time you're faced with something different, obstacles, people driving by, it's just a situation that you just have to make a decision. And do you make the right decision every time? No, but I've gotten to the point now where I've been through a lot of things that didn't work, and I've learned the lessons the hard way, and my percentage is getting better by the day. Do I have it completely figured out? Never, but I'm hopefully getting my percentage better each day. So yeah, I mean, the answer is try to do your best to hunt like you're hunting without the decoy, and get in those positions where, it's a spot and stalk situation. You're going to try to, get in there. Now, when I think back to, say, someone who tree stand hunts and, they see one bedded down or locked down, and, a lot of times if you're tree stand hunting, there's going to be plenty of cover. That's a slam dunk to me, man. Like if I'm able to climb down from a tree stand and I have any terrain at all to work in close to that deer that's bedded with a doe or whatever, even bedded by himself, I'm going to use whatever terrain I can, to, use a drainage to circle around, a little bit to get on the other side of them or whatever it is. I mean, so yeah,
What do you think about this in that scenario? So envisioning trying to do this in, further to the east where let's say I'm tree stand hunting in Michigan and it's, November 10th, and I decided, I'm going to bring my decoy just in case I get in a scenario like this. So I'm up in the tree, and then lo and behold, I see a big buck locked on a doe out there 150 yards in some thick, nasty, weedy stuff, and they bed down. And now I'm thinking, all right, this is why I brought that decoy. Let's do it. Now I sneak out of my saddle, I get down to the bottom of the tree, I grab my decoy, and then I all of a sudden realize, well, shoot, I've got 150 yards between me and him, and I'm in some good bedding cover. So there's probably does around here. There's does bedded. There's other deer. Do you worry about spooking all those other deer when you're moving in, or do you say, you know what, it's an aggressive move. Some deer are going to spook. That's okay, because when this buck sees this buck that I hold up, he's not going to care about anything else. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would being that you have the elevated position to, I would probably spend a little bit of time analyzing the area, really focusing on, okay, did I see a doe group work into this area that, can I avoid that area if I get down? Can I kind of maybe back out and circle around and avoid that little pocket of does in order to get on the other side of that field or in that other little drainage coming in that'll take me right to where he's bedded or whatever. Obviously, like I said, you still have to make those decisions to, use your hunter instincts to avoid other deer. But if one happens to spook, if you have that thick a cover, chances are that buck only has one thing on his mind. And unless you spook the doe that he's with, you're probably going to be in a pretty good spot because, you're still in the game, because if she doesn't leave, he's not leaving either.
Yeah.
And he's used to, the rut is a crazy time and the deer know that. Deer are going to be moving around all over the place. And he has one thing on his mind. He's going to be locked down on and focusing. He's laser focused on that and that only. And until she stands up, he's not going to stand up. Or if he does stand up, he's going to sit and check and reposition and bed again. And so I would just be confident that as long as you put yourself in a position to where you can get to him without messing his doe up, you're going to be in good shape.
Yeah. Now, is there ever a situation where you would see a buck you want and you would read the situation as one that you just can't make a play on? Like, is there ever, if it's completely still with zero wind, or if he's in the middle of a stubble field and there's zero cover, would you always go for it? Is there always a way to make something work, or are there other things like that are just, nope, this isn't going to work, I'm just going to keep watching and hope he goes somewhere else, or something like that?
Yeah, I would say that I would try to keep my position in an elevated spot, whether it's a tree stand or on a hill or whatever. And I would, if there was just no way, and I've ran into those situations a lot of times, like, like a wheat stubble field or something, you only have like 18 inches tall cover, and he may be out there for a reason, because he can see all other deer approaching and he wants to defend his doe. And I actually had this happen a couple of years ago. And so you just have to sit and wait. And as like we just mentioned, the rut is a crazy time. And if you're not satisfied with the current situation, wait 5 minutes. It changes all the time with the rut. I mean, how many times have you seen, a hot doe get up and move 100 yards and lay back down, so just being patient is as long as as long as you have one in your sights, I would say just be patient, because it's likely he's going to move to a position where he's approachable before dark.
Okay. So you talked about the fact that when you decide to make that approach, that you're waiting till he can't see you. Mm-hmm. And you like to get within like 75, 80 yards if possible before you even consider presenting the decoy. Mm-hmm. And we talked about sometimes you got to run, you got to cover that distance. Walk me through that point where you get close enough where you think, okay, I got to go from covering ground mode to now it's sneak mode. Right. When do you shift into sneak mode? And give me the details, like how slow are you going? Are you belly crawling? Are you crawling on all fours? How do you manage that? And how much do you need to worry about that when you have a decoy versus when you don't? Because I imagine that maybe you get away with a little bit more since you're holding that up in front of you, maybe. Talk to me about sneak mode for Travis Glassman.
Yeah, so obviously like anybody, I like to cover as much ground on my feet just because it's comfortable. I minimize crawling or even belly crawling as much as possible, but there are times where it's necessary. And, I just turned 40 and still young enough to do it, but each day goes by and it's like, I would prefer to just walk,
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, I try to get as close as possible. Say there's a ground barrier, whether it's a fence line or a weed row or a terrace or whatever, and you're able to get as far as you can. Well, then once you get there, you're glassing. It's like, okay, well, here we go. We know that, this is it. We've got to either crawl on all fours, which is usually what is usually all it takes, is just kind of crawling on all fours. And like I said, I'll have my bow in my left hand and the decoy on the stake in my right. And it's just kind of like shuffling both pieces of equipment ahead of me and just keep crawling as close as you can. And if it's super calm out, obviously you got to be very careful and you got to kind of move things out of your way, whether it's move weeds or, just kind of think like a mountain lion where you're just doing one arm at a time. And you're just sneaking in as very slow as you can. And every little movement that you make has a purpose. But a lot of times, like I said, I'm thankful because we have some wind and it breaks up the noise and you're able to kind of get a little more aggressive. And so you're just kind of, the only thing you're worried about is the deer seeing you. So all you've got to do is just keep your head down and you can just kind of keep shuffling through all the cover and you're just fine. So, but yeah, I mean, just doing your best to get within that range where you feel like you want him to see that you're a buck that's approaching him. That may be 50 yards. If you're in thick cover, he may not see you at 50 yards. So every situation's different. And I would say try to present the decoy. I wouldn't go to the extreme of trying to sneak within 20 yards and just popping up a decoy all of a sudden, and I, there may be points where some of the cover is thick enough that you have to get very close. And that's where I would probably introduce some grunt calls and stuff like that. So, he's bedded down tight and he's in heavy cover. And I would probably throw out some soft grunts and have that decoy already up in front of me or on the stake in front of me. And I'll be clipped on my D-loop, just ready to pull back if he gets up and starts marching in. Because if it happens, when it happens, it's usually going to be that he's not stopping. I've never had him sprint and charge, but I've had him lay their ears back, get that glazed over look in their eyes, and they are coming. And if you haven't ever experienced it eye to eye, I know a lot of people have seen it happen from a tree stand or whatever. It is, you almost can't snap them out of that trance. And a lot of people are like, well, don't they see you behind that decoy? They are so fired up and angry that I have seriously had to stand up and yell to snap them out of the trance that they're in, because I honestly think they don't even look. I think that they're prepared for, the other buck to react, and they're just prepared to kind of curl up and just engage in a fight. And so how it is. Like, I don't know if you've been in a position where you're just so angry that something made you just mad, and it takes, like, that's all you're focused on. And it takes a bit to kind of help, get back to thinking normally.
Yeah. So if you're doing this and you have a buck come in that you don't want to shoot,
mm-hmm.
Is that what you literally have to do? Is like stand up and scare him away so that he doesn't charge you?
There are times that you have to do something to snap him out of that to get him to move on. Unfortunately. Yes.
That's pretty wild.
Yes.
So let's imagine that you snuck in, you got within your comfortable range of that, am I right that 75 yards is usually like ideal? Sometimes you'll go closer if you have to, but is that like your sweet spot?
Yeah, I would say 50 to 75 is a good range. I mean, sometimes you may not be able to get any closer and you have to present it a little bit further away. So last year, I was decoying and filming for my wife's hunt, and she was kind of right behind me. And we've done this several times, so we've kind of got it down now. But this buck was bedded with a doe in a corn stubble field, and the closest we could get was like 150 yards. And the only option that we had is to sit and wait for the situation to get better to where we could get closer, or to just sit down and present the decoy and hope for the best, and which is what we ended up doing. Thankfully, the doe actually got up and saw that there was another deer, our decoy, and just slowly started feeding our direction, just because I think she was curious. She didn't put her head up on alert. She just looked at us, went back to kind of feeding around, and it took like an hour, but she finally made it over our direction, and the buck would stand up and snort wheeze at us from 150 yards and would not come charge. He would not. He had his doe away, far enough away that he was comfortable. But eventually, when that doe closed the distance, he got between us and the doe just to protect. And finally, he came into about 35 yards, and the doe, I think he kind of like veered the doe away from us. And she kind of started working away. And we knew that was our opportunity, because as soon as the doe started leaving, we knew he was going to follow. So in that situation, he never did 100% commit, but he came to 35 yards, and my wife made a perfect shot, and it was great. But I've also seen where you get an aggressive personality, and he may stand up at 150 yards and see that decoy, and he's coming. And he doesn't care if he's leaving his doe. He's going to run you off. So again, be prepared for about any different situation.
Yeah. So in that case, when you just can't close in more ground, you guys in that case decided to wait it out, to present and hope he comes your way. Is there ever a time that you could actually sneak behind that decoy and just walk right towards him? Like, does that ever work, and just be crawling or walking, knowing he sees you, but you're behind the decoy, and try to close the distance from 150 to 40 or something? Does that ever work?
So there has been times where I have done that. I would make sure that I use the rule of thumb, if you have tall enough cover, so like say CRP grass that's, waist high, or something that's going to break up your legs moving too much. That's what makes my decision for me, because if they see the deer sticking up above, say, CRP grass or something, that's natural. And they don't mind if you approach them. I would do it in small increments. So I would go 20 yards at a time and hit a knee, and just kind of read the deer and see. If you can tell that they're not liking it, they'll be able to tell you that real quick. They'll kind of like put their ears back and kind of turn and start walking a little bit away or whatever. But if they're accepting it, or if they're feeding and not caring, then you can just do, 10, 20 yard increments at a time, and definitely close that distance. And then you may, get close enough that you trigger his aggression to finally come at you. A couple of years, that was probably 5 or 6 years ago, we used a mule deer decoy. It was a doe on this mule deer buck, and it was honestly a Hail Mary. And so there was a mule deer buck with his does out in a wheat stubble field. Thankfully, the stubble was tall enough that it was doing just what I said, and it was kind of covering our lower body movement. And we did exactly what you just said. The sun was kind of setting in the west. I mean, it was up still. So we were kind of like, really bright. The sun was on our face and on the decoy. We walked from a quarter of a mile across a flat, open wheat stubble field. And we did what I just said. We would go increments, and we just kept getting closer and closer and closer. And finally, that mule deer, because they're herd animals, this is a totally different thing from whitetails, but he saw a deer approaching, and his instinct is, kind of thinking of a herd animal. He wants to scent check that doe that's approaching, and he wants to see if that doe that hasn't been with him all day is getting close to breed. Or I've also seen where a mule deer buck will circle his does similar to like an elk would, and they will push the herd to you to kind of gather you all up. And so it does work to approach with the decoy out in front of you, but I would be careful, because it's not high percentage. Okay. I have used it in a Hail Mary situation.
Okay. Now it seems like another one of the options you've mentioned in a situation like this, where at some point you get as close as you can get, or the cover is, the cover's blocking you in some way or something. And you've said a couple times that sometimes you'll introduce some calling. Can you give me a little more detail about specifically, like, how loud is it? Is it always grunts or snort wheezes? Do you ever rattle? Do you ever do anything else? Like, what's the when and how on possibly calling?
Sure. I would always recommend starting out as soft as you can. just enough to get their attention. Most of the time, what I'm trying to do, if they're not seeing the decoy, is just get their attention, get them to stand up, get them to see the decoy, because that is going to be the time where they're going to make that decision whether they're going to come in or not. So if I feel like I'm in a great position and I don't want to get any closer, but they haven't seen the decoy yet, I'll sit there for a while and let them naturally stand up, because that's going to be the least impactful as far as a potential negative effect. I would let them naturally see it if possible. But if I'm impatient or something's about to happen, the wind's going to switch or whatever, I'll force it. I'll try to grunt as soft as I can, give it to them to where it's not, intrusive, and let them see that decoy and make that decision on their own, whether they want to come in or not. Snort, wheeze too, obviously, either one. If they say they stand up and they are with their doe and they're at 80 yards and they don't want to come in, then I'll do a snort wheeze, and I'll do a lot of different challenges like that, some louder grunting or some more snort wheezes or whatever, and try to get them angry enough to break away. And so, yeah, I mean, again, a visual plus the sound of a call, vocalizations, whatever, every single thing you do increases your chances.
Rattling, is that ever a tool?
I wouldn't be afraid of it. I normally don't carry any rattle system when I'm doing this type of run and gun hunting. But it certainly does work, and it certainly does get their attention. And we've all seen them react aggressively toward rattling too. So, hey, if you want to try it, if you want to, that's something I just haven't spent a whole lot of time. I mean, I've rattled a lot of bucks in from a ground blind or a tree stand, yes, but as far as carrying something on this, spot and stock situation, I normally don't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it would work, Mark. I know it would.
I saw one time when you were hunting with our fellow pal Jesse Coots that there was a buck like running in the distance so quickly that you almost had to yell at it to get it to see your decoy. So it really does, like, sometimes you just got to get their attention somehow. And if they're getting out of there and they still haven't seen you, you kind of got to get crazy, it seems.
Correct. And honestly, speaking of Jess, we've spent a little bit of time together hunting, and he's always a hoot. And when he did that was something new to me. And I was like, man, that actually worked. I mean, and what it was is they just didn't know what they heard. They didn't associate it at all to a human. It was just like us making, the bamp sound, to try to get him to stop. Yeah. We're doing whatever we can to try to get him to stop. And so he just tried to snap them out of their trance wherever they were headed and get them to stop and look. And that's exactly what happened, because that buck, he was one of those that was aggressive enough that he's seen the decoy from 200 yards and he was coming. And then it sometimes it happens that easy, and it's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, there's times you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I love it. I'd love to see that situation unfold someday. So okay, the next thing I want to drill in a little bit further on, again, something you mentioned, but I want to get some more insight is, let's say that buck is coming in, or you've set up, you've called, you've got his attention in one way or another. And you mentioned that you have the option of having the decoy on the bow itself. But in your case, you use a stake. What's the right way to set the stake? Like, what's the right position, and what's the right position for you, the hunter? Like, is it, as a right-handed shooter, should I always stick it in the ground kind of to my left so I can shoot around the right side? Do you kneel? I saw you once laying down almost on your side one time. Do you always draw while on your knees right behind the bow, or do you ever be like crouched way down and then draw back as you stand up or as you come up onto your knees? Like, give me the specifics on that stuff, because I imagine those are very important moments.
Yeah. So again, learned a lot along the way, and the quick answer, as far as, I'm just going to I'll cover everything you just asked, but to fast forward to how to draw around the decoy, or how to shoot around the decoy, or how to draw your bow, the general answer I give people is, you do not need to worry near as much as you think you do on how to get your bow back. Because again, there's been times where I've had to stand up and yell in order to get these deer to snap out of coming into this decoy if I don't want to shoot them. So use that, some deer are going to be very curious. Some deer are going to be very careful. And so you have to be a little more careful, but don't be afraid to make a movement to get your bow back. I would try to draw behind the decoy as much as possible. If you need to, draw your bow pointing the ground and then lift it up and anchor and then lean out around the decoy to shoot or whatever. Obviously still be careful as much as possible. But if that deer is coming and you don't feel like you can move at all to get your bow drawn, understand that if that deer comes in and realizes that something isn't right, they're going to bolt away from you and you will have never drawn your bow. So I would rather make a little bit of movement to get to full draw. And sometimes, I've waited till they're at 5 yards. I've drawn when they're going through some cover out there at 20 yards and they're still coming. And you may not shoot till they get to 5 yards, but at least you're at full draw. And so don't be afraid to get your bow drawn behind that decoy, because what do deer do when they approach them? They're going to move. Deer, they're going to expect movement because you're a deer, you're an animal, you're moving around, and they have not associated any danger at all to that decoy. Otherwise they wouldn't be coming in the first place. So don't be afraid to do a little bit of movement, especially if you're crouched down behind the decoy. My wife always asks me, when do I draw? Because, I'll be kind of guiding her and she'll be right kind of in my back pocket behind me, and I'll have the decoy in front of me and probably running a camera and trying to arrange for her and everything else. And she always asks me, do I draw? And I always say, stay patient. He's coming. You've got plenty of time. She always is worried that she cannot move. And every single time, there's never been one time where she has not been able to get to full draw, get to her anchor position, have plenty of time, and lean out and shoot, because they just are bought into you're a deer. So don't let that scare you. I would say always do what, be as careful as you can to get to full draw. Don't try not to stand up and do anything crazy and try to get to full draw, and, but try to be as sneaky as you can on doing it. But don't be afraid to. What I would say is make sure that you take an extra second, get to full draw, make sure you've got everything lined up, and calmly lean out and get that deer in your sights. And of course, adrenaline plays a part in every situation like this. You're extremely amped up, but make sure you're taking extra time to, lean out. And is it going to be maybe a different position than you're used to as far as shooting your bow? Yeah, probably. You're on your knees leaning out around a decoy, and, I would recommend shooting like that, stick something like that in the ground and lean out around it and shoot. Most of the time, your shots are going to be very close. So you have some flexibility, and so then the other thing to talk about is shot position as far as the deer approaching you.
Yeah.
Some people don't like taking a frontal shot. Some people, there's been times where there's that little sweet spot between the front shoulder and, say, the brisket, right? So there's that pocket. Obviously, we aim for behind the shoulder, but there also is a nice little pocket in front of the shoulder if they're quartering to you. If you're at 5 yards, some of the most devastating kills I've had has been facing on or quartering to. Now, do I recommend taking a facing shot? Never. But if that's all you have, I've seen the quickest kills because it's direct heart shot. It's right there close and personal. So, I don't know what to tell you as far as what to expect, but obviously the deer are going to be approaching you, coming straight in. I would say try to be as patient as you can if they kind of swing out away a little bit to try to get a broadside, but, just be prepared.
So is there a distance when... I'm just trying to think, like, when do you shoot? Because I got to believe one thing that's going through, at least that's going to be going through my mind, is I need to get an arrow in this deer before he kills me. When is there ever a point when you're like, okay, I got to do it now or never? So if he's face on right now, I better take this shot. Otherwise, he's coming at me. Or so because of that, do you try to take a 20-yard shot before he ever gets to within the zone where you're worried about that? I mean, talk to me about that whole decision, because I got to believe that I wouldn't be surprised if I find myself in a position where it's maybe not the perfect shot that I'd love to have, that great broadside shot. But if I don't do this, it's trouble.
Right.
Like, what's your mindset on all that?
So I would, if a buck has committed and he's coming, it's very likely that he's going to come all the way. And we've seen on TV a lot, whenever they get to about 5 yards or so, they almost pause, and it's kind of like, okay, now we're slowing way down and we're ready to charge at any given second. So that's like a ticking time bomb, you know. you don't know when that's going to happen. So a lot of times I like to shoot when they're coming in around that 10-yard range. That's kind of like when I don't really like to let them get inside 10 yards too much. I mean, if you watch the video of my brothers a couple of years ago, it was like 5 yards. I saw that. And it was, I mean, the arrow barely got out of the bow. Now, was that arguably waiting too long? Maybe, but we really didn't have a shot before that because he was coming through a lot of thick cover, and we had a little bit of a gap in the weeds, about that 7 to 5 yard range. And that's when he let the arrow loose. But anyway, again, every situation's different. And I say, always use your instinct, and, you know, especially keeping yourself safe. And if you can shoot one at 15 yards before they get to that 5 yard danger zone, please do, you know, type of deal.
Yeah. So is there anything more on that personal safety side of things that we should cover on this, other than shoot as soon as you can and don't let him linger within that 5 yard zone when he pauses? Anything else to know to make sure we don't put ourselves in undue harm's way?
Obviously, know what seasons are in place. There have been times where, and even in the last few years, I know like Kansas introduced a kind of a later mid-October doe season, and it's just random. It gets thrown in during bow season. So, you know, always be mindful of people being out there with rifles, even if they happen to be, you know, even if they're not supposed to be, is what I'm saying. So like, you know, if you have some roads in sight and say there's a truck sitting up on the hill watching everything you're doing or whatever, I just be careful. I would probably sit down, take the decoy down, see how the situation is going to play out. Let him move on, because you never know when someone's going to put a gun out the window. You know, I mean, obviously use your best judgment. Do it, you know, take a pause, do a 360, make sure that everything looks okay and you don't see any other hunters and stuff like that. Anytime you're holding a decoy, you have a small risk that you're taking. But I've never had a close call yet, thankfully, and I hope to never. But you know, it's like everything. I mean, just like turkey fan hunting. You know, you're holding a turkey fan. Of course, you know, people with a shotgun, you're if you come right in. But you know, everyone just use caution, and it says right on the decoy, use this with caution. There's a reason for it. Yeah. So
well, common sense, right?
Yep.
What else is there when it comes to using this? Have we missed like any other important aspect of how this goes down, or things you're thinking about? Am I missing anything, or do you feel like I know the basics to be able to pull off a hunt like this?
I think the basics has been covered. You know, I know we briefly talked about it. I don't know if people caught it or not, but even if you are ground blind hunting or tree stand hunting, pick one of these up and just sit it at the base of the tree, throw a log on top of it, and have it there available to where if you see a situation that you can climb down and give yourself a lot better chance of killing that buck, it's there. If you don't have it, then you're sitting there for the rest of the day hoping that deer stands up and the doe runs by your tree stand, you know? And so I would just say have something like that available, and then, you know, try to, everything is all personal experience. So use these tips, but use your personal experiences to help you hone the way that you want to do it. I like the way I do it just because I've been through it all all the situations that lend themselves out here in Kansas. Well, if I go somewhere else, I'm not going to have as much experience with deer behavior, how they work through the terrain that you're hunting or anything like that. And so every situation is a learning experience. And again, do I have it completely figured out? Heck no. I'm learning all the time. So I encourage folks to, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. That's fantastic. But at the end of the day, you need to put in the experience. And, 5 years down the road, if you start doing this, you're going to have learned a whole bunch.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, what about a little bit more on the traditional ground game, which I know you've done plenty with as well, which is hunting from ground blinds or natural ground blinds. I know you were hunting a deer a handful of years ago. You called Big Louie, and I saw you sitting in a tree stand one night for him, and you saw him off in the distance, and you realized, you know what, I got to get on the ground and hunt, from eye level. Can you talk to me just a little bit about what goes through your mind when you're making a decision like that? Like, when is it time to, if you were tree stand hunting again in a situation like that, and you decide, okay, the only way to get to him is on the ground. Walk me through how you think about where to set up a ground blind, when to set it up. Is a natural ground blind better than a pop-up ground blind? Can you talk to me about where your head's at on that stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So I always like to start with an observation stand or position. Sometimes tree stands aren't the best for an observation spot, but in this case, you're right. I was in a tree stand and it wasn't a high percentage area to kill this deer, but I knew he was staying in that field. And what it was in that circumstance was, it was just when bow season started in Kansas. We can hunt during the muzzleloader season, and it's mid-September when that opens, but we have to wear orange for all of September until October 1st. Then the muzzleloader season's over. So in this case, I was wearing orange, observing in a tree stand. This buck, which is the biggest buck I've killed, he was stepping out of a standing, we call it cane or cattle feed. Basically what they do eventually is they come in and swath it and rake it and bale it for winter feeding for cattle. And I knew that it was a matter of time that was going to be swathed and baled. So I knew once that cover was gone, his pattern was completely going to change. So I hung a stand in a cedar tree row. So it just got me up, 8 to 10 feet, just so I could see over top of this field. And I seen that, from his neck up, I would see him walk some terrace channels to go out to the west edge of this field. And he would stand there until the sun set. And then he would walk across an open stubble field to get to another standing cornfield. And he just loved that pattern. Now, I watched him do that a couple nights. And so I thought, it's time for me to get to the west edge of that field where he stands at, and he gave me about 10 to 15 minutes of shooting light every day. And, and that's all that he gave. So that was the only chance that I had. So there's no way I was going to kill him in that tree stand. So I ended up going down on the edge of that field and basically just cut some of the cane around me and just kind of tucked myself back off the edge to where when he stepped out on the edge of that field, when he looked down the edge in both directions, he could not see anything sticking out like a human. And so I was back. And so I seriously had to, I was sitting there with 6 to 8 foot tall feed to my back, extremely excited for the moment that I would be able to lean forward and look either direction, because he came out in different directions every night. I just kept visualizing in my mind this buck just appearing. And that is exactly what happened. Again, I hunted him for several nights doing this, but I would pick the wrong trail or the wrong exit point every night. And finally, I think it was, the 6th or 5th or 6th night or whatever it was in a row. And he stepped out within bow range, and I ended up ranging him and shooting him, and everything was fantastic. But, most of the time I don't have a pattern where a big deer like that is giving me a daylight opportunity.
Yeah.
But, to answer your question, a natural blind is much better, and I will never use a pop-up blind if I can get away with it, just because it takes some time for them to get used to that. Now, if you can set that thing up, in the wide open and let them get used to it is just a normal thing. Deer see random things all the time. They see a pickup, they see a fuel trailer, from the farmer. They see all of these things that they end up getting used to, whatever it may be. And they're fine with that. But if I'm moving in quick, I do not like using anything that's going to be new to the area. Otherwise, a mature buck like that's going to be hesitant.
Yeah. Do you have anything you've learned over the years when it comes to finding good spots or making a good spot as far as a natural ground blind? Any advice on how to do that the best way?
I like to use natural areas of cover, whether it's a fence line, because a lot of times, the farmers can't get all the way up to the fences. I like to use the natural weeds that are growing around the fence line. Maybe it's a corner post or something like that. And you can gather, a lot of vegetation from the surrounding area and bring it all in. And even that, when you make even a small change, you still have to have those deer getting used to that. But I always recommend getting out there and doing this well before you're wanting to hunt. A lot of times I just set up a ground blind last weekend, and it's not going to be very well hidden, but I did that with a whole month ahead of me, knowing that it's in a natural funnel where deer may move through there during the rut. It's a perfect travel corridor for a cruising buck. And I like using the peak of the rut with the decoy situation that we've already talked about, but there is that sweet spot that we all like to hunt in the last of October and the first few days of November, where those big bucks are ready, but they haven't found that doe yet. And if I have, I'm going to be hunting because I just love to hunt. And even though I may not have that perfect situation where I can go after a deer with a decoy, I like still hunting, a scrape here and there, or I like hunting a natural funnel here and there, because there is a chance that he will move through. I'll still hunt just because that's what I do.
Yeah.
But, the chances of seeing a big mature buck during daylight, especially in wide open country like this, is somewhat slim.
Yeah.
So
what I like about the natural ground blind thing, and you did this exactly with that big Louis hunt, is that there's nothing holding you down from adjusting. So you saw him, he came out in a different place. You could make an adjustment the next night. You could make an adjustment the next day if you wanted. I mean, even with like a mobile sticks and a saddle set up from a tree, there's still that, work that has to go into to pulling your set, moving to a new one. And that's much less than guys with with permanent sets. But when you're natural ground blind hunting, you're just going to go find a nice little spot to cozy up into and move some branches around, and you can do it, and you can make the perfect move to the perfect spot with zero inhibitions, like nothing that you have to worry about. Like, gosh, this is going to be a pain in the butt. No, it's not.
Yep.
You're just literally going to walk to the new spot and shift things around a little bit, and bam, you're going.
So what I like to do, Mark, and I think this would benefit you in Nebraska, is, you have a backpack. I would get a low profile camp chair, something that sits low, or I even get the little turkey chairs that they sit only a couple inches off the ground, that you can kind of lounge back. I'll strap that thing to my pack, and I won't know where I'm hunting, but when I go in, I know that where the deer have been working, and I want to find, an area that's going to be put me in a pretty good position, and I'll just kind of clear the weeds out of the grass out or whatever, and I'll back myself up against a fence post with some weeds in it, or something like that, and I'll just try to sit crouched as low as possible. And like you say, just let the deer be the deer and let them move their natural way without throwing a ground blind up. And like you said, all you got to do, if you need to move, it may be 50 yards. You can grab that chair and move on down the fence row, or, wherever you need to be. So I like exactly what you just said.
Yeah. What about the other thing to think about when you're hunting the ground, and you already talked about this with the decoy, but it's different without a decoy, is getting drawn, getting in position for a shot and getting drawn from a natural ground blind position. Can you talk to me about some of the things that you're either preparing for ahead of time or thinking about in the moment when not having that nice distraction of a decoy?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And if you've done any spot and stock hunting at all, you have to definitely pick your movements very carefully. And obviously when a deer's looking away or had his head down to eating or anything like that is the time where you want to draw and make your move to, you might need to raise up 6 inches to shoot or whatever it is. And yeah, I mean, when a deer is potentially looking your direction, you're locked down and you can't do anything. And, you know, I would say don't do anything abrupt. Even if you draw your bow, practice drawing your bow as slow as you can, you know, and just try doing that, because if they happen to be looking away, but maybe they can still see you out of their peripheral, you can get by with it by just slowly getting your bow back and getting on target before they, you know, jump, you know. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a great answer for you as far as when to draw your bow without a decoy. It's just you have to read the deer's body language and try to make your best decision on when you can move.
Yeah. Final question. I've seen you hunt in Crocs. Do you recommend that?
I am so glad you brought that up. No, I do not recommend this. That was the rookie tip of the year, meaning don't do what I did. And, you know, so I'm a guy who, I've got a lot of things going on. I've got a busy job. I've got 3 kids at home. As many folks do, they have a lot of things going through their mind, and we don't always do the best job of throwing all of our gear in the truck. Now, I recommend during hunting season, getting every piece of gear in your truck and just parking your truck to where whenever it's time to go hunting, you don't really have to think too much about, you know, if I have it or not. Well, that day, you're right. I did not pack my boots, and all I had was Crocs to go hunting, or to get me from, you know, my house to the hunting area. And unfortunately, when I got out to put on my boots on, and my boots weren't there. So I ended up hunting that evening in Crocs. Thankfully, it was during that September hunt where it was still like 80 degrees, and it did not hurt my hunt really. I just was sitting down on the edge of that field after Big Louie in my Crocs. So
what's nice about those Crocs, they have all those holes, so they really vented really nicely so your feet wouldn't overheat, right?
Yeah, I was definitely not overheating that night, but the stench of my feet, you know, was nicely escaping through the holes of the Crocs. So.
Yeah. So Travis, this is fun. Like I am excited to put this kind of thing into play. Is there any final words of advice or final reminders or anything you want to leave with people if they're considering taking to the ground more often, whether it be with the decoy or without? Anything that we haven't touched on you want to make sure we touch real quick?
The last comment is get aggressive. It's the rut. If you're passive during that time frame, and we all live for November. So get aggressive, whether it's with or without a decoy, even if it means get down from a tree stand and sneak to within, you know, get 100 yards closer to a bedded buck with a doe. Your chances are getting greater the closer you get, even if it's creating yourself a nice little ground blind that we just talked about, a natural blind that's closer to where when they get up, it's likely they feed down this little drainage right beside you or whatever it is. Get aggressive, because you're doing yourself a favor by putting the odds more so in your favor.
Yeah. So love it. Well, for people that want to follow along with your videos or anything you're doing, where can they learn more or see more from you, Travis?
You can just simply search Travis Glassman on YouTube, and I have a personal page there. I started that just by, just to share hunts with buddies and whatnot, because they, you can tell stories all day long, but they really are able to see it on YouTube. And then on Instagram, Travis_Glassman, you can follow along there. I post pretty much all my hunting adventures on there. So I do have a Facebook page as well. I don't do as much hunting stuff. If I am successful, you'll see a picture on there, but I don't do as much, story or anything like that as I do Instagram.
Yeah. Well, it's great. I've really enjoyed watching the videos and following along with what you got going on. It is, looks like a very fun way to hunt. So I appreciate you sharing your experience and insight.
Sure. I'm honored to be on here, Mark. Thanks for asking, and I'm always glad to help. So if anyone wants to reach out, feel free, and especially you, Mark, if you're out in Nebraska and need something, I'm not too far away. So give me a call, and I'll be glad to help.
You got to be careful what you offer. I'm going to be hitting you up soon. Thanks, Travis.
Don't hesitate. Don't hesitate. Take care, man.
And that's it today. Hope you enjoyed this special two-parter with my good old buddy Dan Johnson, longtime co-host on the show, now the purveyor of Sportsman's Nation, the Nine Finger Chronicles. Make sure you check out all the great stuff he's doing there with his own gig. And big thanks to Travis Glassman as well. Fascinating discussion. Can't wait to put this into action out there in Nebraska. And with that out of the way, thank you for listening. I appreciate you coming along for the ride, tuning in for this one. Best of luck out there on your own hunts. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.